In 1610, in the city of Logroño in northern Spain, 6 people faced the flames, their supposed crime. They had refused to confess to being sorcerers. They maintained their innocence, and they paid the ultimate price. But here's what makes this story different from every other trial of its kind in history. One man on the tribunal that condemned them knew they were innocent, and he spent the next 4 years proving it. This is the story of Europe's most infamous witch trial, and the man who stopped it. And it begins in a cave, a vast cathedral-like arch carved into the green hills of Navarre in the Spanish Basque Country. A stream called the Infernuco Ereka, the Infernal Creek, flows from its dark interior. Ferns cling to the wet rock. The air smells of moss and rain and something older. This is Zugarramurdi, and 400 years ago, this place was the heart of a nightmare. Inside, the whispers began. Whispers of women who could fly, of men who could command the storms, of children who met in secret to worship a goat-headed god. Whispers that grew into accusations, accusations that grew into a frenzy that ended in fire. A story that asks a question we are still wrestling with today. What happens when an entire society decides to believe a lie? To understand what happened at Zugarramurdi, you have to understand the world that existed before the whispers. The Basque Country sits where the Pyrenees meet the Atlantic, a land of deep valleys, fast rivers, and villages so remote that the nearest neighbor might be an hour's walk through the forest. For as long as anyone could remember, the people of these valleys had lived in 2 worlds at once. They were Christian people, living Christian lives, but beneath the church bells, something older lingered. From a Christian perspective, these were pagan practices. They believed in Mari, the Lady of the Mountain, a powerful figure who lived deep inside the high caves and emerged as storms, as lightning, as a ball of fire crossing the sky. They left offerings of bread and milk at the mouths of caves. They gathered in the Aquelarre, the meadow of the goat, to celebrate under the stars. To an outsider, these were not just quaint customs, they were acts of idolatry. But to the people of the valleys, these were simply the ways of their ancestors, passed down through generations. They didn't see a contradiction. They were not rebelling against their faith. They were simply living as they had always lived, in a world where the old ways and the new had learned to exist side by side. It was a nuanced, complex reality, and it was about to be judged by men who saw the world in black and white. The year was 1609. Across the border in the French Basque Country, a judge named Pierre de Lancre had been sent by King Henri IV to investigate reports of sorcery in the coastal region of Labour. De Lancre was a man of absolute conviction. He believed the Basques were a wild, ungovernable people and that their strange language and stranger customs were proof of a deep connection to dark forces. He launched a campaign of terror. Hundreds were arrested, dozens were burned, entire villages were emptied of their women. The panic, like a fire jumping a river, crossed the mountains into Spain. It arrived in Zugarramurdi in the form of a young woman named Maria de Chimildegui. She had left the village at 16 to work as a maidservant on the French side. Now, 4 years later, she was back, and she brought a story with her. In France, she said, a fellow servant had introduced her to witchcraft. She had attended the Sabbaths, she had seen things, and she had seen her neighbors from Zugarramurdi there, in the caves, in the dark. She named names. It is impossible to know what drove Maria to make these accusations. Perhaps she had been genuinely frightened by the hysteria raging in France. Perhaps she was settling old scores. Perhaps she simply wanted attention. Whatever her reasons, the effect was immediate. The village turned on itself. Families who had lived side by side for generations began to look at each other with suspicion. Old grudges found new weapons, and the whispers spread. The local priest reported the accusations to the Inquisition. 2 senior inquisitors, Alonso Becerra Holguin and Juan de Valle Alvarado, were dispatched from the tribunal at Logroño to investigate. They arrived in the Basque Mountains expecting to find dark work, and they found exactly what they expected. Under intense interrogation, under the weight of leading questions, the accused began to confess, and the confessions were extraordinary. They said they had flown through the air to the great Cave of Zugarramurdi. They said they had worshipped a black goat who sat upon a golden throne. They said they had kissed the goat beneath its tail. They said they had feasted on forbidden things. They said they had poisoned their neighbors' cattle, blighted their crops, and harmed little ones with curses whispered in the dark. The more the inquisitors pressed, the wilder the stories became, and with each confession came more names. The accused named their accomplices, who were arrested, who named more accomplices. The investigation consumed the village like a fire consuming dry wood. By the time the inquisitors returned to Logroño, they had arrested dozens of men, women, and children. Many would spend months, even years, in the dungeons of the tribunal, waiting for their trial. Some would never leave. 5 of the accused perished in prison, from disease, from neglect, from despair. In November 1610, the city of Logroño held a great auto da fe, a public act of faith. It lasted 3 days. 30,000 spectators crowded the streets and the main square, drawn from across northern Spain by the promise of spectacle. They watched as 53 prisoners from Zugarramurdi were paraded before them, wearing the tall pointed hats and painted robes of the condemned. Some were reconciled to the church, forced to publicly renounce their supposed crimes. But 11 were sentenced to burn, 5 were burned in effigy, their bodies already rotting in the prison. 6 faced the flames. They were the ones who had refused to confess, the ones who had maintained their innocence to the end. Their reward for telling the truth was the pyre. As the smoke rose over Logroño, the authorities congratulated themselves. They had cleansed the land. They had defeated the darkness. But there was one man on the tribunal who watched the flames and felt something very different. Not triumph, not relief, doubt. His name was Alonso de Salazar Frias. He was the 3rd inquisitor, the junior member of the tribunal, and he had been outvoted by his 2 senior colleagues at every turn. He was not a radical, he was not a rebel, he was a lawyer, and the lawyer in him could not ignore what he had seen: confessions extracted under duress, stories that contradicted each other, children as young as 7 naming their own parents as servants of darkness. Something was deeply wrong. Salazar Frias did something remarkable. He convinced his superiors not to end the investigation, but to pause it. He proposed an Edict of Grace, a public promise that anyone who came forward and confessed to witchcraft would be pardoned, no questions asked. The idea was to draw out the truth. His colleagues agreed, expecting a flood of new confessions that would confirm their work. They got the flood, but not the confirmation. It's hard to stand at a point like that in a story. A community shattered, innocent people dead, a legal system convinced of its own righteousness, and not ask, what does it take to find the truth when everyone around you has already decided what it is? I've spent months living with that question, trying to understand the world of Salazar Frias and the people of Zugarramurdi. The answer is too deep for a single video. That's why I wrote Europe's Time Capsule, Unlocking the Mystery of the Basques. It's my attempt to tell the complete story, how a people maintained their soul across centuries. It's accessible whether you're new to this history or already captivated by it, with illustrations that bring their world to life. And I realized you can't understand the Basques without understanding their connection to food, so I created the Basque Kitchen, authentic recipes from Euskal Herria, 15 traditional recipes I've personally tested. Mami taco, the rich tuna stew fishermen have made on their boats for generations, and of course, the famous burnt Basque cheesecake. Both are digital books, so you'll get instant access the moment you grab your copy. You can start reading or cooking today, and if you prefer to listen, the book comes with a free audio version, so you can take the story with you wherever you go. Just head to untoldhistorybooks.com or tap the first link in the description. I'm one person, running this channel from my kitchen table, because I believe these stories deserve to be remembered. Your support through these books is the best way to help me continue. Thank you. Now, back to the story. For 8 months, Salazar Frias traveled through the Basque Mountains, village to village, valley to valley, alone with a secretary and a translator. He carried the Edict of Grace like a lantern into the dark, and people came to him. Over 1,800 people confessed to witchcraft. But Salazar did something his colleagues had never done. He listened, not to confirm what he already believed, but to understand what had actually happened. He cross-referenced the confessions. He asked specific, detailed questions. He tested the claims. People who said they had flown to the Sabbath, he asked them to describe the route. Their answers didn't match. People who said they had been at the same gathering, he asked them to describe what they had seen. Their stories contradicted each other. He asked the accused to produce the ointments they claimed to have used for flying. They could not. He asked them to demonstrate their powers. They could not. And then the retractions began. One by one, the confessors came back to him. They told him they had lied. They had confessed because they were afraid, because their neighbors had accused them and they thought confession was the only way to survive, because the inquisitors had told them what to say, because they were children and they had been told that if they didn't confess, they would burn. Of the 1,802 confessions Salazar collected, 1,384 came from children between the ages of 7 and 14. When he spoke to them gently, privately, away from the terror of the tribunal, they told him the truth. They had made it all up. They had been told to. His senior colleagues were furious. They accused Salazar of being a fool, of being manipulated by dark forces himself. But Salazar Frias was unmoved. He compiled his findings into a devastating report. His conclusion was a single sentence that echoes across the centuries. There were neither witches nor bewitched until they were talked and written about. He was not merely saying that these particular people were innocent. He was saying that the entire phenomenon, the flying, the goat god, the Sabbath, the curses, was a fiction, a collective hallucination born of fear, rumor, and coercion. The witches of Zugarramurdi had not been discovered, they had been invented. Salazar sent his report to the Suprema, the governing council of the Inquisition in Madrid. His two senior colleagues sent their own reports, furiously contradicting him, demanding more executions. The Suprema deliberated, and in August of 1614, they issued their verdict. They sided with Salazar. All pending cases were dismissed, all prisoners were freed, and the Suprema issued new, strict rules of evidence for any future witchcraft investigations. Confessions obtained under duress were no longer admissible. Accusations required independent corroboration. Physical evidence was required. These rules were so stringent that they made future witch trials virtually impossible. From that day forward, the Spanish Inquisition effectively stopped burning witches. Consider what this means. While the rest of Europe was descending into the worst period of witch hunting in history, while tens of thousands would be executed in the German states, in Scotland, in England, in Scandinavia over the coming decades, the institution most often remembered as the symbol of religious persecution had quietly become one of the first to reject the entire concept. Because one man had the integrity to ask questions, the patience to listen to the answers, and the courage to write down what he found. The great cave of Zugarramurdi is quiet now. The stream still flows from its dark interior. The ferns still cling to the wet rock. Sunlight filters through the great arch and falls on the stone floor, where 400 years ago the villagers were said to have danced with dark powers. Today, a small museum stands at the edge of the village. It tells the story not of witchcraft, but of persecution, of how fear and rumor can destroy a community, of how the truth can be buried under an avalanche of lies, and of how one man dug it back out. Every year, on the night closest to the summer solstice, the people of Zugarramurdi gather in the cave. They light bonfires. They roast lamb over open flames. They share food and wine and music. They celebrate the Sorginenjayaldia, the festival of the witches. It is not a dark ritual. It is a feast of defiance, a community taking back its own story, refusing to be defined by the nightmare that was forced upon it. The cave that was once a symbol of terror has become a symbol of resilience. A young woman stands at the mouth of the cave. She is not afraid. She is a daughter of this village, here to celebrate with her family, her neighbors, her friends. She knows what happened here. She knows the names of the innocent who burned, and she knows the name of the man who stopped the burning. She carries both memories, the darkness and the light, because that is what it means to remember honestly. Lies can build a pyre, but they cannot burn the truth, not forever. Not as long as there is one person left who is willing to listen, to question, and to speak. Thank you for staying with me through this story. It's left me thinking about how fragile the truth is and how much courage it takes to defend it, even when everyone around you has already made up their mind. If you'd like to go deeper into the world of the Basques, my books are waiting for you in the description. Every purchase helps me continue this work, and I'm truly grateful for each one. If this video moved you, I'd be honored if you'd share it with someone who might need to hear it. A friend, a family member, someone who could use a reminder that the truth is always worth fighting for. And if you're not yet subscribed, I'd love to have you along for the next journey. Even a simple like on this video makes all the difference. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.